Hello, everyone, and welcome back to week 3 of the DIF 2018. Today, we're going to start off the day by exploring more about blockchain technology. Recently, blockchain technology has dominated the news with cryptocurrencies to generate buzz, and a myriad of marketing efforts by companies have been made to drive interest in this tech. It is safe to say that the blockchain technology is one of the most rapid moving technologies out there, and 2018 might just be the year when this establishes itself as the fastest growing digital technology since the evolution of the internet. Despite the hype, however, blockchain is still a relatively immature technology with a market that is still nascent, and a clear strategy for success in blockchain has not yet emerged. As a technology, it is complicated, and it will be up to designers to temper its technical complexity and usability. My name is Bledar, and today I'm joined by Colin Thompson in this conversation, who is the co-founder and managing director of Intrepid, a blockchain venture studio that designs products and builds new companies. So thank you very much for joining us, Colin.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here with you guys.
Well, it's great to have you here as well. And you're joining live from Hong Kong, just to let the people know out there. And I would like to start the conversation off in a very unorthodox manner, maybe, which is a little bit of a challenge for you. And that would be if you could explain blockchain to me, Colin, without using the words cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin in under a minute. Do you think you will be able to do that?
I will accept the challenge.
All right, that's fantastic to hear.
We'll self-destruct in 5 minutes.
Fantastic. Well, I mean, you can go whenever you want to.
I think the best way to describe it, at least the story that allowed me to have my blockchain awakening, was you can think of the blockchain as essentially a network of people. And this network has to be connected by something. And what they're connected by is like a spreadsheet, like a Google Sheet in the cloud. And so everybody has this Google Sheet in the cloud, right? And so when anybody makes a exchange or a transaction, that gets recorded in the Google Sheet. Everybody has a record of that actual transaction. But in order to authenticate or to reconcile that transaction, there's another group of people that gets a beacon or a message that says, hey, please reconcile this. And they solve this puzzle, which says, yes, that information in the Google Sheet is correct. So therefore, we have a way of authenticating the actual reliability of the truth that's in that sheet. So that's how I would kind of explain a blockchain to people, is a network of people connected by a spreadsheet in the cloud.
That's a good description, and that's a great way to start this, just to give all of you out there that are joining live a quick description of blockchain so we can go into this conversation exploring a very new perspective. So I'd like to engage all of you out there who are joining us this day to comment your thoughts, comment your questions, and all of those will be taken care of in this discussion with Colin. So Colin, I would like to ask you a little bit about a perspective that often is overlooked in discussions about blockchain today. We talk a lot about these descriptions that we just started with. We talk a lot about the technological complexity behind it and how it might be a great outlook for the future in terms of record keeping, transactions, contracts, and so many other things. But what about design? If we focus on that in this discussion and ask the question, what's different about designing for blockchain?
I think, strangely enough, that the principles of design haven't changed. It's just the canvas that you're using is different from, say, what most people will be using. And because the canvas is different and it allows you to do different things, you get to explore different ideas. But at the end of the day, design really starts with people and humans, their emotions and their problems. Right. So if a blockchain does all those things that you just expressed, right, the real challenge for a designer is, well, how can I apply this particular technology in a way that impacts the most people? And then if you're trying to impact a lot of people, what are the things that these people want, and how can you actually translate this technology in a way that they can use it that can actually benefit their lives. And really, that's, I think, what any designer tries to do. I think the challenge, though, with blockchain is that there's few designers that can overcome the technological understanding of what a blockchain is. So therefore, they don't explore or experiment with, what they can do with it. I think that's one of the areas that's really lacking in our industry, actually.
And why would you think that is? Why is it lacking?
I think that it's new. It's not complicated, but it gets when something is new and misunderstood or has a little understanding, people fear it, and if they fear it, they stay away from it. So the community has become very exclusive, where it's very math and engineering centric, and therefore you get those types of products, right, that are geared towards a certain group or certain kind of people. They tend to be from more affluent countries with very high educations that are trying to, fix things in financial services for a very elite group of people. Whereas I think if there was more diversity in the industry and more perspectives that would be applied to it, then we'd be able to open ourselves up to different products and applications that would have wider applicability. So it's really the exclusive nature of the industry that is preventing, I would say, products and applications that have a broader appeal.
So what are those barriers that you think designers see in this? You mentioned fear very briefly, but are there any other kind of competencies maybe that they need, or they need other resources, or is it kind of the same from very traditional models? Or do you think we need new design principles to design a blockchain?
I definitely don't think you need new design principles. I think that you need a certain temperament, a certain curiosity about learning and understanding. I would think of it as if you were a musician. If you play the guitar, you wouldn't be afraid of playing the drums, even though they're different instruments, right? You would think of yourself as a musician. You would say, hey, I can make a different kind of music with this instrument, right? And I think that designers, if they're working in web, or even if they're an architect or they're a visual designer, if they were to explore the underlying or the intrinsic values of a blockchain, they would be able to come up with ideas and interesting products and services that would be in line with their background and experience, but in a completely new way, right? So I think that it's really just overcoming the barrier out as it's technical or it's mathematical, it's computer science, and really just embracing it as a canvas.
So when we talk about blockchain, we talk a lot about its potential to decentralize data, about creating trust in that data, and how we also interact with that data. I think that's a very generalization about blockchain, but if we focus on the trust itself and we take design on the other side of the spectrum as well, so how do these two interact? What would designing for trust really mean?
Well, I think that's a good question. I think designing for trust is breaking that down is it's the belief that something is reliable and true, right? If you couple that with the nature of the blockchain, which is that it lowers costs, right? So you go, okay, you're lowering the cost of trust. So if you're lowering the cost of trust, what are the areas in the world where trust is very expensive, right? And so you can think of any kind of transaction where two people don't really know each other and there's a little bit of risk on either side. So how can you create something that, spans these two groups, lowers the cost, and provides more trust because there's a reliability that information is true? And that can be applied to a variety of different things. We've done that with wills. We've done that with trade, between two parties that are looking to actually exchange goods, but one needs financing in order to actually deliver these goods. How can you create an instrument so that someone can fulfill something without all the information or the goods actually being paid for at the time of purchase, right? So these are all things that if you understand just the basic ideas of what trust is and lowering the cost of that trust, you can come up with a lot of different ideas that will solve problems that were, previously before not easily solved, right? And so I think that's where designers can come in, because to me, design is really about translation. and is translating, things that are complicated into things that can be tangible or things that can be understood.
And if we just juxtapose the design for trust in terms of blockchain with a lot of other record keeping and other applications that we've seen out there from a traditional sense, what would you say, because you have a background in design and entrepreneurship, what kind of recommendations would you give to designers out there? Just, you mentioned some of them, but if you have any additional thoughts on how designers should approach this problem.
My personal perspective is, if we live in a day and age where we have these types of tools, and not just blockchain, that's a very advanced tool, but just our basic everyday tools, things like, Photoshop or Illustrator, or just our web frameworks, allows us to be, quite creative. So in saying that, I go, if you have all these tools and this ability to create things that we could never really create before, you might as well go for the biggest problems out there, right? I'm really personally, this is my personal penchant. If I see another food delivery app, I think I'm going to just jump off a building. So like, no more food delivery apps, no more ride hailing apps, right? I'm saying solve big problems, things like energy distribution, or financial inclusion for the people that are unbanked. I think those are the bigger problems that are still very good business. It's a really interesting design challenge, and it impacts the most people. So I would say people that have the skills or the temperament or the intuition to be able to manipulate these types of tools to create things, they should really swing for the big problems.
And we started off this conversation by mentioning very briefly the technical complexity behind this, and also just the usability. So if we look at the usability itself, designers probably play the biggest role in that. So if you just think about the interface itself and how that has developed during the past couple of years, how have you seen design being changed or implemented in just the interface problem?
So I'm really happy that you asked this question, because this is an area that I'm actually very, very fascinated by. And I asked myself the question, what is beyond blockchain? What is beyond AI? And how do we interact with these things? And I'm of the frame of mind that we're moving towards ambient experiences or autonomous systems. And because we have the ability to secure information and transfer that, in a private manner as well too, how can we use things that are more intuitive to human beings in order to authenticate things and in order to interface with information? And I think more like conversational UI, augmented reality, and multi-factor authentication, so biometrics, retina, voice, are all ways that people can interact with computer systems that are a lot more intuitive than punching on a screen. And I think that's going to be a big transition where, I can authenticate myself securely and privately without that data being leaked or exposed somewhere else, or being sold off to another party, in a way that is just, I sit down at my computer and a camera looks at me and I put my thumb down, or I could say, open my wallet, and the computer will recognize me in a way that is uniquely myself. And it doesn't require like a 54 character hash string, and private keys to actually access, right? And I think that's going to be the area where we're going to see a lot more adoption, conversational UI, ambient experiences, and more automation in terms of how we interact with computer systems.
And if that's the way we're moving forward with in terms of blockchain, what is the complexity level there? Because it seems like it can become even more complex, or maybe it's the other side of the spectrum. It becomes more simple. What is your perception of that?
I'm of the frame of mind where it will be more simple. However, the underlying aspects of that simplicity are going to be a lot more robust and provide more sovereignty to individuals. So to me, the best design, especially in blockchain, is when nobody knows that it's a blockchain. They value the service or they value the product for what it was intended to do for you. So let's take the interface. The idea that it can be secure and you can manage your own data and information in a way that doesn't get leaked or doesn't get sold off to anyone is a very basic tenet of what a blockchain can do. However, when you add design to that and you make it easy for people to interact and you make it very simple and useful for them to do everyday things, is I think where the real magic of design comes in. But it's marrying that idea of this is what the underlying power of the technology can do, and how do you apply it in a way that is human, that is simple, that is intuitive.
So the importance of design seems very significant in terms of blockchain. And do you currently see any big trends where you can see that this is going to a very simple way, people are applying design, or are people still a little bit more, let's focus on explaining it first and take design later?
I would be lying to you if I told you that there isn't a lot of explaining. But I think what's happening, though, is that the market is telling the industry what's working. And what I mean by that is you notice that the things that get widely adopted are the things that seem the least intrinsic to blockchain, right? So if we take, for example, like something like a CryptoKitties, the design principle was, how do you take information or data that is ubiquitous and make it rare, and then make it friendly and accessible to a large group of people, right? So buy cats online, right? Pretty simple, right? But what that opens you up to is, oh, these things are collectible. There's design, there's art, there's creativity that all has a new landscape because of this underlying infrastructure called the blockchain that allows us to do those things. So I think that's the areas that I think where it's the design becomes very powerful but innocuous while using the technology.
And if we leave just the question of design a little bit behind us, it seems that it is very important. But then if we juxtapose this to this hype that is going on, there's a lot of talk, there is a lot of explanation, and there's a lot of significant hope that blockchain will solve just a lot of problems. But then if we could differentiate what is needed with blockchain and what is very overhyped.
I think anything in mainstream financial services is overhyped. And ironically enough, is that the areas where blockchain technology, at least from my perspective, has seen the real progress is in areas outside of that. And I would say that, because of the hype, it attracts the wrong, the industry attracts the wrong types of people. And they move in because of the hype, they want to cash in, be a part of something new, get a promotion at a job, go to conferences. And it hasn't been attracting people that are really looking at this for the innovation that it really is. And I think until we actually see more applications being widely adopted, that isn't going to change. But like I was saying earlier, the irony is that we look at areas in blockchain technology where you're seeing more adoption, and it's more in like the gaming, content, media, art, as opposed to financial services. But there's so much importance put on financial services that these things over here are overlooked, and it is just as transformative in this area as it would be in financial services. So my example that I give is, Napster kind of decimated the music and recording industry, and it really transformed that industry, and not necessarily for the better. I'm seeing, at least the way that I think of it is, I see that blockchain technology, and if the proper applications, could reconfigure that industry in a way that is actually more equitable to the artist. So I go, that's a really massive opportunity to redistribute opportunity in a way that is only natural to this particular technology.
That's great. And if we just would focus on the impact of blockchain also outside of financial services and more on the social side of things, we have actually a question coming in from the audience already, who cannot wait to get an explanation on this, because you just mentioned that businesses and designers should focus on solving real global problems.
Yes.
Now the question says, do you have any examples of such startups or businesses that are applying blockchain in solving these problems that help the population at large?
Yeah, I mean, I was just down in the Philippines and I came across a company that's doing a mesh network using blockchain technology to solve the issue of telecommunications for the archipelago in Indonesia, or sorry, Philippines and Indonesia. So how do you actually get mobile data transferred down to these very remote areas? And if you can get mobile data transferred down there, that means you can actually get internet, you can get financial services down to those people that are actually the most unbanked people in those two countries. And I thought that was quite amazing. Not only is that a really great infrastructure for financial services in an area that is good for large business and good for the individuals, but you can also do things like energy distribution, right? So how can someone power their own home and then actually redistribute energy back to the grid and be compensated for it? So I think last mile technologies and renewable energy is a really, really big deal. And I think that there's a few people out there that are doing that. Again, it's a little bit more complicated, but it's not insurmountable if you've got the imagination and the will to challenge the status quo.
And it's interesting, if we look at these two perspectives, we just mentioned the financial services and how it might be overhyped there, and it's a lot of talk about how blockchain can be implemented there. Now you mentioned these global problems that also can be solved on it.
Yes.
Why is it that people are still focusing on financial services and not on these kind of problems? Why is there not enough talk on them?
I think that's a very good question. I think from my perspective, which is quite limited, is that I think that there's still a lot of inequality in this world, and blockchain technology, AI, these are all very elite things. You have to be well educated. You have to be in certain circles of people. And then within those kind of communities, there's a certain cachet with being a part of these types of industries. And I think that, if it's possible, like the problems of Silicon Valley are not the problems of the world, right? That's the thing. But unfortunately, those are places where there are really huge brain banks and a culture that kind of, surrounds that. And I think that if we have the ability to empower entrepreneurs and creative people in different regions of the world, they will look at their own, environments and solve problems that are intrinsic to them. And I think until we can actually get the technology out to those places, or taking like this idea of blockchain education and indoctrinating people into looking at bigger problems than algorithmic hedge fund trading, then I think we're going to continue to be in the same place where they're at. But I think that's also changing. I think there's more and more people that are looking at these massive world problems as also really great business opportunities too, but they're daunting challenges.
And if we look at investing too early versus achieving a competitive advantage by exploring the applications of blockchain, where do you see the interplay between that? Is it right now the right moment? Has it passed, or is it still to come?
Oh, it's still to come. I started in this industry in 2013, so I'm like OG. I'm like old school to a lot of the people that I see lately, and it's very strange to me. But I still look at it as that we're still at the bottom of the hype cycle, right? We're not at real peak hype. We're at the bottom of the hype cycle where it's people actually have awareness now. And I think more and more people are attracted to it because there are a lot of different things that you can do with the technology if you have imagination and you're looking outside of, the kind of very narrow use cases that we've been describing earlier. I think there's a long way to go. I put it to you this way. I wish I had 50 more designers and 100 more engineers to do all the amazing things that we could do with blockchain technology that haven't been done yet. Right? So there's so much to do.
And what would be your first to-go project with these many designers and engineers? What would you go for first?
my personal passion is healthcare. I think national healthcare systems would be very interesting. Anything to do with like the provenance of prescription drugs, pharmaceuticals, just personal health tracking, connecting with your doctor, connecting with your hospital, and then connecting with national healthcare systems, so a society can actually manage disease a little bit better because they're exposed to the information that might be able to help them. I would love to do something like that. Like if I could really wave a magic wand and change the world, that's what I would love to work on. The other fun side for me would be anything to do with gaming or media. I'm really interested in gaming, autonomous tournaments. I think that esports and gaming is really interesting, and I'm afraid that the same powers that be are going to start to dominate those really grassroots types of movements in a way that is from the old, corporate system. And I think autonomous tournaments and the ability for people to actually arrange their own leagues and play with their friends and, compete with each other in their own way and create their own cultures would be very, very interesting and fun. So those are the two sides of the spectrum, right? Healthcare and entertainment.
And that's also very interesting that you mentioned that, because that's exactly what I wanted to go next. We talked about financial services, gaming, healthcare. They seem so different from each other. And if we boil this down, if we go back to the design question and we come to these very different sectors and design, what is the challenge with that? How do we approach all of these things in terms of design?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think you touched upon it too with user interfaces. Right. One of the main ways to interact with the blockchain is through what they essentially call a wallet. Right. So healthcare, it's essentially the entry point for an individual is going to be their wallet. But the question is what information is in that wallet, and how can you design an experience so that person can actually manage their health and then transfer that information to somebody else in a way that's valuable. Whereas in gaming, it's more about the idea of the network. Right, the network and people being connected to a ledger, right, and then how that ledger actually governs, right, a community, right. So there's key principles to blockchain, but sometimes you might want to use or emphasize one aspect of blockchain technology because it's most applicable to this certain use case, and another in another case, right. So it really just depends on what the problem is that you're trying to solve, right. So for me in gaming, it's more about governance and transactions, whereas with healthcare, it's more about accessibility and management, right? It's more personal on this side. So yeah, it's just a different way of looking at it.
And different ways of working we can also see during the development of the 2030 past years, and also probably it's going to change again. But if we look at the spectrum from today and just 20 and 30 years ago, I have a question from Paul from Twitter, and also a question that I wanted to ask. So we are combining our forces here with the audience. How do you see startups in these past years? What is the change and challenge to start a new venture in terms then also just taking blockchain into consideration? What are the differences, the major differences that you see?
The major difference I would say is not necessarily related to blockchain technology. I would say right now is the best time in the history of startups to do a startup. Because we've got things like Google Hangouts, we've got Slack, it's easy to travel. I think that, small businesses or startups need to be global by nature. Right, the rule of thumb is like all the smartest people in the world are not going to work in your company. They're going to be all over the place. And so how you actually connect with people and communicate with them and garner trust between people is how you can actually get things started in a very dynamic way. The cost to do a startup is a lot lower, right? So really it's just, do you have the capacity to look into the abyss of uncertainty and marshal your resources? And it doesn't mean money. It really just means your ability to communicate, your ability to inspire, your ability to organize and and manage yourself, really. So I think whether it's on blockchain technology or AI, that is the most interesting shift that I've noticed over the course of my 15 years in entrepreneurship. It's a lot easier to start, and people are more willing to connect in different ways than face to face in an office in a cubicle.
But if we would focus on startups that are very much based on blockchain and look at traditional startups and just their constellations and ways of working, do you see a significant difference between them?
Well, definitely the skills are different, right? So you do need certain kinds of people, very hardcore engineers. I mean, like the real hardcore engineers. You need to be able to work with those types of people. And then and then I'll give you my experience, right? Our engineer, a really great guy, his name is Harsh. He's a hardcore hacker engineer, right? And it was when I actually got together with him, and as a designer, him as an engineer, that we started to be able to build a rapport and relationship that communicated across our specific disciplines. And I think that created actually a more interesting product and a more interesting company. So I think really it comes down to recognizing what are the inputs that you need in order to build these certain types of companies, mathematicians, engineers, and then bring something new to the table, and wherever that may be. I think that is a unique thing with blockchain technology, is that you need to bring in very disparate and different people in order to create these types of products. Whereas I think in traditional startups, and I can only say traditional startups as in kind of web and mobile app stuff, is that you can have a very kind of homogenous group of people that all live in the same area that will come up with an idea, and it's very unique to that, and you can kind of go and run with it. But I think with blockchain technology, you really do require a lot of different people in order for these types of companies and businesses to work.
And I really like what you just said, because we're talking about technological advancements a lot in today's society, and most of what we say is they're detaching us from other people, and it makes us very robotic in terms of how we work. But what you're saying is that interpersonal skills and just the unique personas between all of these people really play a role in technology today as well.
Yeah, there is a real convergence of ideas that come together, especially with when you're trying to do these types of projects, is that you have to have in our situation, you have to have someone that really understands economics, really understands technology, really understands design, understands psychology, has very good interpersonal skills, right? You need to combine all these types of people in order for these types of businesses to be able to flourish, because you need strong technical, and then you need to be able to communicate that strong technical to people. And then you need to be able to connect with a large group of people from all around the world in a way that's very human, because you have to be able to imbue trust, because there are problems in our industry that are beyond the scope of just the technology, right? So these are all aspects that have to be built into the organization, right? So connecting, interpersonal skills, problem solving skills, trust, especially if you're working with people from different time zones, different cultures, different genders, I think that's really very much a part of the blockchain startup story, right? And I think you're going to see more and more of that. Gone are the days where you can rock up to Silicon Valley and there's going to be 100 guys all in one room, right? That's just not going to happen anymore.
That's great. I would now like to turn to the audience and their questions. They've been sending in questions during our discussion, and they are very interested in the perspective of design. So thank you all for joining this conversation and posting your thoughts. And if we go to the first question that they have, it's about the design process. And the question is from Adeline from the website thinkdiff.co, who asks, when in the design process do you take under consideration blockchain?
Oh, wow. Well, as people that work in with blockchain, we're always thinking about okay, what can we do with this, right? But what comes before that is more about what is missing, right? So at least from our perspective, we have a systems design approach, very much a design thinking approach as well too. And it was a group of us that got together and said, listen, what is the problem with blockchains in general? and what are the use cases and applications we want to be as the outcome of our process. So it was really, mathematician, computer scientist, designer, lawyer, and economist that all sit down and go, well, we're going to use this technology, but what aspects of this technology are we going to use, and what's the most valuable for these specific problems, right? So it really starts from the beginning, right? But I would say we're always thinking about the problem and the humans. What's the problem that these humans are facing, right? And then how can we actually solve that problem using this technology? A lot of the times, you don't need blockchain technology to solve those problems, right? And in some cases, this is the only technology, or this is the best technology in order to solve those types of problems.
So basically, it is more of a proactive approach rather than a reactive approach.
Yeah, in our case, it is, because we go, we understand, because we've been doing this for a while and we're really kind of passionate about it. We understand the inherent capabilities of the blockchain, right? But it does take a diverse group of people to go, okay, well, now that we understand that, what are the problems out there that this is best suited for, right? That nobody else is doing or is not already available, right? And so then we narrow it down like that, right? And I think in our case, the way that we looked at blockchain technology, and as someone from an entrepreneurial background, I said to myself, well, how can we make this a lot easier for the average person to be able to come up with ideas? Because we're not going to come up with all of them ourselves, right? So if we can empower other people and give them the tools that they would be able to use intuitively, maybe they'll come up with better ideas than we can, right? So we looked at it from that perspective, is how can we take this tool that we really like and make it easy and accessible for other people of varying and diverse backgrounds to use it to solve problems that we would never think of.
And what you're saying right now seems like your way of working, and it might inspire designers out there. And I would like to also close off the conversation with a little bit of these inspirational thoughts that you have, just in terms of how do we empower more designers in this? And this is in line with the question that also is coming from thinkdiff.co and a person called Natalie, who asks, how do we get more designers involved in the blockchain world? So what kind of message would you send to all the designers that are joining live, and also those that would catch up on this talk?
The advice that I would give is, don't be afraid to cross the train tracks. And what I mean by that is, you should take the initiative yourself to go over to that other land, the blockchain land, the crypto land, and go and learn and understand what they're about, right? Because they're not going to come over there, right? But if you go over there, you might be able to bring some of them over to your side and enlighten them on ideas that come from your world. Kind of quick. And you can understand them, will they be able to understand you? And I think that's been one of the major things that I've learned, and how I got into blockchain technology was I just went and I found the first tech person that I came across on YouTube, and I asked them the dumbest questions I could. And I'll tell you something, the first person I ever spoke to in blockchain technology was a kid that I saw on YouTube. He was Vitalik Buterin. And I asked him the dumbest questions ever, and he was really patient, and he was really open to them all. And ever since then, I've always kind of just, continued to do the same thing. So I generally like, if other people want to ask me questions, I'm kind of always have an open door policy, because it affected me so much in my life.
And all can start with just asking a question. Thank you very much, Colin, for joining us today. It's been a pleasure to have you here and go through this design process in blockchain, why design is important. Your thoughts have been very insightful, and I hope the audience has enjoyed those just as much as I did. So I would like also to thank everyone that has joined in live today. It's been a pleasure to have all of you here and have your insights and thoughts to be shared here with Colin that joined us live from Hong Kong today. And I would just like to also just give you a short outlook on the day. We're starting the third week of the diff here. It's the last week, and we have so much more content prepared for all of you. We have 4 more of these Diff on Air sessions, just as this one, with other topics to be covered. We have 4 studio sessions where guests are joining us here in the live studio to talk about their respective topics. We have podcasts and films that are ready to be watched. So head down to thinkdiff.co and take part of everything we have prepared for you. And I will see you soon again. So thank you very much.